Good morning and welcome. We are few in number today, but rich in spirit. Amen? Amen? And if you're joining us online, thank you so much for joining us on this rainy Sunday. We do have one announcement, or at least I have one announcement I want to pass on to you. The Anna King Circle will be meeting at the Bob Evans on Jefferson Road, and that'll be tomorrow at 11 o'clock, Monday, January the 10th. Are there any other announcements that need to be brought up? Okay. If not, let us please join in our call to worship. The Father's voice bears witness to the Son.
God has shown himself to us.
The Son bows his head beneath the waters of the Jordan.
God has shown himself to us.
Christ submits to John's baptism and frees us from slavery.
God has shown himself to us.
God's love is seen to the end of the world.
God has shown himself to us.
This is Mike Cedor. Not too long ago, Pastor Paul and I talked about the spiritual gifts that I found on the website for the West Virginia conference. And I know Pastor Paul has talked about that in a sermon or two over the last several months. And so I wanted to take a few moments just to show you where that spiritual gifts information or toolkit is on the West Virginia conference website, and how easy it is to fill out the information and complete your own spiritual gifts inventory. So if you go to wvumc.org, you'll see right on the homepage there's an article or a little click here for spiritual gifts resources for clergy and laity. So if you click on this link, it'll take you to a page where it has some information about the spiritual gifts, and there's a link right here to go to take the inventory for yourself. You can also look at the frequently asked questions, and there's some more information down below. The information is free, doesn't cost anything, and it prepares a nice little summary of what each of the spiritual gifts are that you have based on how you answer the questions. So if you have more information, you can use that to kind of help you work within the church in the different levels. So here are some different ways that you might be able to get involved. So if you would take a few moments, you can click on the link and go to take your spiritual gifts inventory. If you have any questions, please feel free to talk to Pastor Paul. There is a lot of great information in here, and I'll go ahead and click on the link so you can see the kinds of questions that are asked in there. So during this inventory, it'll ask you to range the question or the answers for all these questions from a 1 to 7. So the questions are fairly easy, and we want you to go with your gut reaction to each of those questions. So this is just the sample page, it actually is the survey. And if you need more instructions or information, there is 80 questions to answer, and that helps narrow down your gifts based on a number of different criteria. So real quickly, I'll just pull up on my screen just to show you. So this is the one that I completed, and it gives me the top. I don't even know how many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 results for my spiritual gifts, and then over here is also the definitions that I generated a PDF to give me all the definitions of all the spiritual gifts. So if you have any questions, again, please feel free to talk to Pastor Paul. He can help you with guidance through this. And it does generate a nice little PDF. You can do with that what you will, whether you want to share it with the church or keep it to yourself. That's up to you. But again, my name is Mike Seor, and I'm with the tech team here at First Church. And if you have any questions or would like to get involved with our tech team, please feel free to give me a shout or grab me after church. We'd love to bring you on board. So thank you, and we hope this was helpful. Have a great day.
Good morning. Things are going to be a little less formal today than what they even are for me on most Sundays, which is pretty casual to begin with. This is Baptism of the Lord Sunday, and our scriptures and hymns and everything are going to be relating to that, and I have a sermon that goes along with that. But during the course of this week, I came across an article that I would like to share with you, and not only in some of the insights from the article, but in some of my own personal thoughts and reflections as we look into what's going on for the year 2022. The title of this article is 12 Disruptive Church Trends That Will Rule 2022, and parentheses, and the Post-Pandemic Era. This article was written by Carey Nieuwhof, and I've had the privilege of seeing Carey in various functions over the last few years where he has given presentations and hosted events for discussion and everything. Carey is a former attorney out of Ontario Division of Canada who became a minister in 1995 and started the Connexus Church in Barrie, Ontario. Connexus has grown to one of the larger churches in Canada, and in recent months, or even years now, I suppose, Carey has stepped down from the full-time ministry running of that to be an emeritus situation to concentrate on writing and lecturing and that sort of things. So with this, I popped up some information, and I showed that as of last week, Carey Nieuwhof has 20 million downloads of his weekly podcast. So he's touching some information that people want to hear and want to get his opinion on. One of the things that he makes light of, or doesn't make light of, but puts a light on, is the fact that during the last 2 years, most church leaders are in the same situation as medical professionals. It's been excruciating, and we're burned out. And there are a lot of things that we are striving to get done with little resources and with little rest to try to do it. I think that many of us thought that the pandemic, when it hit in the very tail end of 2019, would be a typical flu season, and that we would see the end of it quickly and hope that by Easter everything was going to get back to normal. We've proven now with the last 2 years that if anything is going to happen, it's not going to be normal or what we're used to thinking. There's going to be a new reality that's going to emerge, and more than likely it's going to be a little different than what we think or what we come to expect as a church. And I'm hoping that there are a good number of folks that are online listening with us this morning, or that we can get to share this during the course of the week, because much of what I'm going to say this morning lays right at your feet as to the things that we're going to need to be doing in the next few years. There have been a few areas of growth. I have been surprised when I go to North Carolina to see that in the Fuquay and the Raleigh area, there are actually new churches being built. Many of those were somewhat under construction before the pandemic hit, and a few of them, after talking to a few folks, wished they had waited just a little longer to start construction and the expenses that go along with it. But these are some of the questions that we've had to wrestle with over the last 2 years. First of all, can we reopen, and if so, how? We have reopened, but not to the degree of where we're engaging people in our community. We need to look at who's coming to church and maybe more specifically, who's not coming to church. We argue as to whether we should be online or digital. Should it be live or should it be recorded? Is hybrid the future, or is hybrid temporary? Is it here to stay, or do we think it's going to go away? There's mask or no mask, vaccines or no vaccines, Democrats, Republicans, red, blue, male, female, black, white. However you want to think about it, there are differences of opinion, and we are split down the middle in many things as to how we go about tackling this. For many of us, these matters have pressed us into a characterization that perhaps we're morphing into a new type of culture. The hybrid church, what I basically classify us as right now, with a live in-person worship service at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning, an online presence that goes out as a live service and then is available all through the week, is sort of a hybrid model that has come about in the last 2 years. And many of us jumped onto it early, but we've not done a whole lot with trying to refine it and put it into a different situation. Because of that, we are in limbo still after 2 years. Even without another global crisis or another virus variant, both of which have hit us now, and now I understand this last week we've come up with a new term that I don't even remember, but now we are able to get the Omicron virus and the common flu together, so that it's one big whammy that hits us. It's not killing as many people, but it's making them pretty miserable. 2022 will be a year where the normalized view of things is going to further emerge, and we're going to be able to get a handle on it. But there are these 12 points that Kerry Newhoff points out that I want to read some of what he says and then give you some of my opinions as we look at this for the coming year. Number one is the demise of the old model of church. Now, that may seem a little strange. The church, as we know it, has been around for hundreds of years. We haven't changed a whole lot, and maybe that's part of what our problem is. In 2021, the Gallup poll shared for the first time ever, church membership dropped below 50% nationally. Among the millennials, only 36% identify with a church. Similarly, a decade ago, only 22% of millennials said that they have no religious affiliation, and today that number is 31%. Generation Z now says 33% of Generation Z says that they have no religious affiliation. At the same time that all this is being figured out by polls that are going on, they actually polled 15,000 churches just before the COVID crisis hit. And they came up with these results for the years between 2000 and 2020, 2 decades, a 20-year period. During that time, in the year 2000, the average church attendance across the United States was 137 people. Now, there are some large churches in there, and there are some very tiny churches in there, but the national average was 137 people attended church every Sunday. In the year 2020, the average was 65. I think all we need to do is look at the situation of the church that we're in and those around us to see that those numbers have significantly declined over the last 20 years. And I suppose there's a lot of ways we can take a look at that and maybe some blame to share along the way, but the simple approach that I take is that the younger generation does not see the relevance nor the need for church as it is being done today. The current approach to church is not only ineffective, but it hasn't been effective for decades. Yet, we as pastors get a little lazy and we tend to keep moving forward as to somehow things are just going to turn around and go back to what they were. Now, I realize that, when you're getting close to retirement, you don't want to do a whole lot of changing and shaking things up. But at the same time, I don't want to see an institution and a facility that I love simply disappear. We can have optimism, but sometimes I think our optimism turns to delusion. There is the church that is no longer here, the church where parents got up on Sunday morning and got themselves ready for church and expected their children to be ready and brought them to Sunday school and brought them back in the evening for youth fellowship or whatever, and made sure that they were involved in a Bible study sometime during the week or maybe a midweek service. And then there is the church today where if we're here one Sunday out of the month, we want to consider ourselves active. And if we can bring our kids, great, but if they really give us a hard time, we'll just leave them home in bed. So there's been some change in the way that we look there. But what hasn't emerged yet is what this new church, or what something that will become relevant to those around us, is going to look like. And I think that's what we need to go on to in these next few points. Growing churches are going to move and innovate beyond weekend services. Now, I know weekend services are what we all grew up with. There's a lot of theological reasons to have a service on Sunday morning, and there's a few practical ones as well. But a lot of the reasons that it developed on Sunday morning and the reason that we did so well no longer exist. It's not a blue law state. There are other activities that go on. There are other things that happen all during the course of the week that the entire civilization now thrives on a 24/7 schedule. Sometimes I think that churches want to function like a restaurant. That the restaurant decides what it is you want to eat, and that it can only happen in a 1-hour window and only in a particular building, and if you miss it, you miss it. Now, what kind of a future would McDonald's or Bob Evans or any of the others have with that particular attitude? You can only eat food in our building. Well, if that was the case, we wouldn't have the need for Grubhub or DoorDash. We're only open 1 hour a week, but we expect the entire civilized population of our area to flood in on us on that 1 hour. And we don't do a whole lot in between. Now, I realize that the church is more than that 1 hour of performance on Sunday morning. And that may be just a little harsh, but in some cases it is the pure reality of local churches. That the only thing that the neighborhood sees is Sunday morning. Other activities just don't seem to do anything. The reality is that people don't live in our church building. They live in the community that surrounds the church. And this is where we interact with non-Christians all day long, every day. To relate to those people and to involve them in what we're doing as a church in a local community setting is going to require us to innovate, to try some new things. Number 3 says the vision for the future will become clearer. Well, I certainly hope so. Some years ago, we all got caught up on the idea that churches had to have a vision statement. They had to have some type of ministry. They had to have something that they could plaster on a wall that everybody could see as they came in and out of the church. But the simple truth is, we came up with some fancy slogans that we didn't follow up on. That we really didn't know what our vision was. We really didn't have a plan to reach into the community. We thought that we would survive on the way that we always have, which was simply to regenerate ourselves by expanding our families and hoping that they stayed with the church that they were brought up in. Unfortunately, most of our kids don't live in our territory anymore. They've moved to where jobs are, they've moved to where opportunities are, and if they have stayed here, they've moved into activities that take them away from the church and the vitality that we have. So moving forward, we need to come up with some innovative ideas as to how we present church to the community around us. Now, here's where Newhoff says many of the ideas you'll see in church in 2022 will be criticized and dismissed until they're not. But that's how innovation works. The leaders we criticize today will be the leaders who coach us tomorrow. And I think that is true in so many settings that people that come in with new ideas are almost immediately bombarded with, that can't work, we can't do that, we've tried that before. But if they're persistent enough and have enough gumption about themselves to push it forward, they'll see that people shortly will start to understand where they're trying to come on and bring new ideas into the church. Attendance is probably going to normalize. Now notice I didn't say it's going to return. I think it's going to normalize with the fact that we have an opportunity to reach folks online, and if we can find ways to involve them in one-on-one personal relationships, we will eventually see a new church develop. Now, all of this is not bad news. We have to approach it from the standpoint that the audience that we have online, well, we need to approach them like they're real people, because they are. They may not be sitting in these pews, they may not be here face to face, but they are people who we come in contact with all through the week, and people that we could make connections with because of an online presence. One of the problems we've always had as a church is that we continue to live in the past. From the first day that I got here, I have been bombarded with the idea, oh, our church 20 years ago, we had these pews full. We had all the management from Carbide. We had activities going left and right. But that's not where we are today. We can't build the future of our church when we constantly live in the past. We have to realize that the community has changed, but the people are still here. We're just not reaching them in a way that they find relevant to their life. They've not been presented with enough crisis in their life to find a need to turn to religion for that comfort and for that salvation. Hybrid church is simply going to become church. I think hybrid title will drop before too long, and I think just about every church will do some type of online service along with a live service, something that people can come to and be a part of when it's going on, or something that they can piecemeal during the course of the week and pick out the things that they want or the time that they want to watch it. The debate between in-person church versus online church is, well, it's sort of a false debate because it's church either way. As long as we're involving praising God and celebrating what God is doing in our lives, we have a worship service, whether it's live or in person. 2022, by the end of it, we simply will not be using the term hybrid. It will simply become church once again. However, for this to continue to work and for things to continue to thrive, the in-person worship needs to become more personal. I think we're going to have a tendency to stray away from formalized services, the high church approach to things where everything is responsive reading, standing up, sitting down. I think we're going to be referring more towards a teaching style service and an involvement with those that are here, whether in the connection time before the service or after the service, or in the involvement of a question and answer series during the service. I think it's important that we find out that we need to become more personable in our worship service if we want to relate to other ones. And I think there's going to be a tendency that the large mega churches are going to divest themselves into smaller groups and into more worship services during the course of the week. I think there's a huge possibility that a church will find itself, instead of having a one-time worship service on Sunday morning and hoping for 150 plus people to show up, to offering church 3 to 4 times a week and wanting an average of 25 to 30 people in attendance. Offering people more choices, more times, and more availability so that we can become more closely connected in our worship and more reliant on each other. No one wants to be a number. In the future, treating people like numbers, we're going to continue to get declining numbers and not a whole lot more. There have been many people in my life that have left the Methodist Church, the Baptist Church, the Lutheran Church, whatever, Presbyterians, don't want to leave anybody out, and gone to the new mega church, the independent community, quote, non-denominational, don't believe in that term at all, church that pops up and entertains, has a lot of fluff in its service, has a lot of attendance, a lot of activity. Some people stick with that, and some people don't. The doors are constantly bringing people in and constantly showing people out. I'm not being critical of that type of worship. But many people are looking for something different than that. They like the entertainment aspect of it, but they need a personal connection. And it's hard to have a personal connection in a church when you're sitting in an auditorium with 3,000 other people. So I think that we have an opportunity to be more personable, more involved in what's going on in people's lives. The goal is not to have a church where everybody knows everybody. That just doesn't work out. The point is to have a church where everybody is known. We may not know the names of everybody that comes into our church, but we know that they're there, and that's the important issue. Information will move online, and transformation will move to the in-person. Now, I'm not saying that transformation can't happen when you're watching online or watching on TV. I mean, that's not really something new. I go back to my childhood days, and we can remember those televangelists that had the national programs that touched people in ways that some did have a transformational change. The Robert Schulers, the Oral Roberts, the Russ Humbards, the Moral Majority out of Lynchburg, all of these churches that had a specific audience that they were looking for and doing it on a national survey, and by doing so allowed people to transform in their way of thinking. But there's a huge difference, if I can use this as an example, to listening to an album on Spotify. How many of you know what Spotify is? Okay, it's a music service. It's the newer version of radio. But there's a huge difference between listening to music online on Spotify and going to a concert to watch the band in person. A few weeks ago, Kathy, Caden, and I went to a Chicago concert, and then we went to a Lindsey Sterling concert, and we were just thrilled with the excitement that came from live performances on stage. Sure, I knew all the Chicago music by heart. I could pretty well sing right along with them. Maybe a touch off key, but I would be with them. But there's a difference in seeing that live, and that's what we want to excite people about when we're talking about online versus in person, that there is a chance for more exciting in-person worship if we learn how we are to address people. Number 8 says location independent church members will increase. Now, what in the world am I talking about like that? Location is not near as important as it used to be. It used to be that churches only relied on about a 5-mile radius of where they were located. Businesses, office buildings, and things like that, they wanted their people to live within a certain radius so that it was easy for them to get back and forth to work. But with the pandemic of the last couple of years, we found out that more and more people can work off campus. And the productivity, in many cases, improves. They no longer put up with an hour-and-a-half commute to work and another hour-and-a-half to go home in the evening. They sit down at their computers at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning, and they start working. And they work on what they need to do. They make contacts, they make calls, they do teamwork, whatever's there, and they're finding out that productivity works. Consequently, people who at one time needed to be on the edge of the beltway in whatever major city you want to look at are finding out that they can move further into the country as far as online availability allows them and get the same jobs done. But in moving further out, they're removing themselves from daily contact with people, and that's where the church can come in to rescue that type of situation. So many of our church members in the future may not live directly around us. They may have a contact with us by family member or by catching us online or by whatever reason they eventually got to see us, and they just stuck with us. We have examples of that already, of folks that were raised in this church and have reconnected with us once we went online. Now, this is the one that really kind of hits home. Number 9. Pastors will sense a diminished authority. Sometimes I wonder if we ever had any authority to begin with. The authority comes from God and the use of His power. And I think as the church moves forward, we will see more pastors in a leadership, vision-giving capacity, CEO type of position, more so than one of authority standing in a pulpit saying, "Thou shalt," because that hasn't gotten us too far in years past anyway. Real authority does not spring from an office, a title, or a perceived power. It springs from humility, from love, and an increasingly clear sense of how the kingdom of God is advancing in this world. Sounds like a description of Jesus Christ. And maybe that's who we ought to be modeling more about. If leaders can embrace the idea that they can lead without being authoritarian about it, without writing the rules and expecting everybody to jump, then I think we will see more people who jump on board to take leadership positions because they see that no matter where they are in their life, there is a particular skill. And here I want to allude back to taking your spiritual gifts assessment, because next Sunday I'm going to be directing my sermon and everything towards that. And if you have some understanding as to where your spiritual gifts lie, it will make the service a lot more meaningful to you. So leaders who have the capability of being suffering servants, as a book I read in seminary put it, will probably have much more impact on the outreach of their church. And number 10, the brain drain will become acute. We're already seeing that. The last few years, many pastors have retired early, stepped back in responsibility, or left the vocation altogether. And we are not seeing numbers to take their place. For many years in West Virginia, we have not had enough ordained elders to fill our largest churches. We are relying more and more on part-time pastors from here to there, and we're not the only conference in that situation. All those around us are facing shortages of qualified ministers to do the job. The future will require not just leaders with great hearts, but they're going to have to be leaders who have great minds as well, because much is going to be expected of them in the way of casting vision and getting that vision into operation. Number 11 is the exit of uninvested investors. It's sort of a recalibration of our giving patterns. One of the strange things that has happened over the last 2 years is that even though there has been a huge decrease in the amount of people coming to church, the giving levels have not dropped off to the same percentage. Some churches are holding level, and in a few cases, maybe even seeing a little increase. But the simple fact is that many of the people that leave us or do not come back after certain situations occur in a church, we're not invested givers to begin with. They had never really connected with the idea of tithings and blessings and the work of the church in their local community. We've gotten to the place that if we have money with no purpose, and we don't show that purpose, then we're going to become a church in decline. And that's true in a lot of cases, because we have a lot of churches that have money socked away and trust funds and everything else, and they'll probably be able to operate until the last person turns off the light switches years down the road and still have money in the bank. But they're not active and they're not recruiting. They're not looking for people. And then we see churches that are growing and have more people than they know what to do with, but have trouble stretching from one month to the next to make the ends meet to pay the bills. Same problem on both ends is the uninvested investor. And number 12, finally, less predictability. As much as all of us are longing for a return to a more stable, predictable future, chances are that's not going to happen. We're going to continue to see things change, and we're going to continue to try to be an innovator. And one of the things that you should know from me by now is I'm not afraid to try something new. I'm also not afraid to back up and punt if it's not working. And I think the church has to be willing to take risk. It has to be willing to make changes. It has to be willing to find out what it is that we are called to do in our particular community. What it is that God is placing inside of our heart in a way to awaken us to our own spirituality while exposing those around us to the possibility of God being in their lives. Now, perhaps my little bit of a cold this week and my deeper voice has made me a little monotone and monotonous in what I'm saying this morning, but right now I'm trying to explain that there are a lot of things that we need to do in the next few years. There are a lot of things that we didn't think we'd ever have to do. There are areas that we've never worried about before that we need to be now. There is a connection lost between our church and the community around us. We need to find that. We need to find out what it is that makes us unique to this neighborhood. And if we don't, then do we really have a reason to exist? The church is a living organism as long as everybody is alive in it, and as long as it is continuing to grow and to seek out new life, as Star Trek would put it. What will be our epitaph 50 years from now? Did we die a slow death? Were we reborn? Were we made alive again? These are the questions that it's not just for the few that are here today. These are the questions for all of those who have a connection with First United Methodist Church, South Charleston. They are areas that we need to take a serious focus in, and they are areas that take our prayer, our faith, and our financial obligation. I told you today would be a different service. And I am capable of rambling on for 30 and 45-minute sermons. What is this church capable of? Are we simply going to survive? Or are we going to do everything and anything that we can to thrive? There is a church split coming, and I'm not talking about the United Methodist Church. We've got one of those coming too. But there is a split among all Christian denominations. And that split will be those who continue to do what they've always done and expect things to return to normal and slowly but surely die off. And those who make the determination that now is the time to innovate, now is the time to reach out, now is the time to evangelize, and they find a path to thrive. History will show that this is a defining moment, brought on by a natural crisis. But how we respond will be what's remembered. May God continue to give each and every one of you a safe 2022, that your health remains well, that your family remains close, that we do everything that we possibly can to stand with one another, to support one another, to laugh, to love, and to cry with one another in all that we do. I'm going to ask Pat if he'll jump into the program, into our closing hymn. O God of all creation, you came into the world that we might know love and new life. Pour your Spirit on your church, that it may fulfill Christ's command to live the gospel everywhere, that the proclamation of the good news might be heard throughout the earth. Reassure us that we are your beloved people. Defend us against all evil and temptation. Give us grace to bear faithful witness to you. Endue us with love. Keep us constant in prayer, and empower us for the service of love as we go forth into this world. Amen.